John's start to the world of criminality and preparing Andrew for the mission. Joan continued to flee in the woods, hid the money in drugs as well as the money to buy the tanker in a safe place, and began to spend from it moderately. Because he was going to the city at night in disguise so that no one would recognize him, and his condition was bad because he slept in the open in different places from time to time. Joan's psychological condition was tired, as he was killed by thinking about his destiny and destiny of his family and all those whom he loves, including Katie. But he cannot communicate with them because the police are watching his communications and lurking on him. In that same night, Joan could not sleep and he started thinking and thinking and thinking until thinking exhausted him and started crying and smacking his hand on his tree next to him. And Meckel was his only refuge, so he would go at night, spend some time with her, bathe sometimes, and leave in the middle of the night, and he got lost for a long time, spending most of his time thinking and walking until he lost a lot of his weight because of malnutrition and thinking about the forced destiny. Joan decided to build or find a place to live in, far from people, and with the passage of time, he found leftover materials for a company that had abandoned its business in the depths of the forest. Joan began to think and explore until he found a huge water pipe at the foot of a hill, a small mountain. Joan made sure that it was the ideal place to prepare a house for him, and that house would be hidden in the woods. Joan had unrivaled intelligence, which was an obstacle for the police and gang members to find him. So he would enter the city in disguise at night and would not enter the big malls for fear of cameras, so he would buy from the small supermarkets on the outskirts of the city, and talk to the elderly only who did not follow the news, and they would not get to know Joan's character. And Joan's only entertainment is a nearby lake in which he swims and spends some time around it. Joan brought some wood and simple digging equipment, and he closed the large tube at both ends with wood and brought another small tube that accommodates his body and extended it next to this tube. Because he will bury this tube completely, so it will be under the ground. Concerning the other tube, it will be a secret passage to him too for entering and getting out. Actually, Joan brought an old bed from some of the neglected old rooms of the company and put what he could inside the tube, and closed the wood and buried the tube from the top with dust after placing another vertical tube and another horizontal one so that he could control in the direction of the wind. By doing that, he would be able to ventilate the new room at the bottom. That work took days, during which Joan was resting, and continued later until he finished the burial work. And then Joan brought the bushes and weeds and planted them over the tube so that after several weeks it became impossible to know where Joan was underground, even if someone stood above what it was buried, and there was no difference between the planted land and the rest of the jungle land. Joan's life began to be relatively stable because he had found a safe haven for him after the diaspora life that he was living in the forest. He used to get out of the big tube through the small tube outside and put trees and weeds on the opening of the small tube and leave and come back in the same way. Indeed, finding Joan was a kind of fantasy at the new home. Joan was very careful when entering and exiting, making sure that the place was free of intruders, even though his place was far in the woods. But he completely knew that everyone would try to overthrow him, as there was an amount of money allocated to those who could bring him. And he also knew that the gang's money and drugs were in his possession, and that was all threatening Joan. He was so careful that, out of his extreme care, he used to put strings around his place and make sure every day that it was safe and that no one really had changed its location when walking on it. One night, Joan was sitting at Meckel and complaining about his boredom which was over him, so she suggested to him a suggestion that she should buy him a used phone, an internet chip, and a power bank to spend some of his time on the internet and steal news of the city through it and play some games. So he agreed strongly and was glad of this idea, and she had already bought these things. Joan took them with him to his new home underground. Indeed, Joan was able to overcome the boredom there. Joan was putting the small internet device at the end of the small tube near the exit, and the mobile device was picking up the internet signal from inside the big tube. Joan never opened his old email because he was afraid that the police would know his whereabouts. He was just browsing, watching and reading. In fact, Joan adapted to the new situation, so his sense of pain and the separation of his family had eased a little. The place and the internet made him forget some of this separation, and he went to the city at times and sat with Meckel, That was a situation he became very accustomed to it. One night, Joan opened the bag of money and drugs and began to think about how he would be able to enjoy this money. And everyone was chasing and started laughing hysterically, saying when I was poor, I was free, no one even knew my name, and when I became rich, everyone became aware of my name and wanted to arrest me, and took a loud laugh, and then he started crying and crying. But he suddenly stopped and started to look for money and drugs and asked himself a question. Why should I not become a drug dealer? I have money and drugs. He rethought and said, yes, I will become a drug dealer. All the roads of life are closed and everyone wants to arrest me. I have appeared on the television screens and news, and my photos are in the streets, and drug gangs are gasping after me. And the village members believe that I am a criminal. I do not have any other roads in front of me except for this road, and I will go through it. Joan took a small stone and wrote on the tube, "The forced destiny," and when he wanted to sleep, he read this phrase until the idea settled in his head, and he took nights and days looking for a way to reach this destiny. Joan used to read a lot, and he had bought notebooks to write some notes that attract his attention. John was still fond of his studies and his love for his old goal, graduating from the university. He used to write some notes in the notebook one night. So he began to imagine that he had graduated from the university and that his mother, father and Katie had attended the graduation ceremony, and Joan began to cry from grief. John did not hold out much at that time. He went to bed and went into a severe crying fit and slept crying. Joan was sitting for long hours looking for the drug trade, types of drugs, gang work, customers and everything related to drugs until he asked Meckel to buy him 10 power banks, and when 5 of them were over, he took them to Meckel's house to be recharged so that he would never cut off the internet, and John lived for weeks reading and understanding this strange world to him until he understood most of its terms and information. Joan was still unable to communicate with the outside world, and he is still wanted by everyone, and this problem prevented him from dealing with the outside world, selling drugs, and enjoying the money he had. One night, while returning from the city, Joan found a young man drinking wine in the street with very old clothes on him while he was drinking a lot of alcohol to the extent that he could hardly understand what he was saying. He tried to stop Joan, so Joan pushed him and continued his path, and at night Joan started thinking about his position with that young man. Joan thought of an idea and said it might succeed, which is to make this young man the link between him and the outside world, as there are qualifications that prompted Joan to this thinking. This young man is acceptable in form and strong in structure, and criminality looks on his appearance, all of which are advantages and requirements for his new goal. Intelligently, Joan watched this young man at night, and found him frequenting wine bars, and everyone turned him away and some of them gave him a little charity. And so he spends his night as for the day, he spends him sleeping homelessly anywhere. This observation continued for a long time until John made sure that this young man had no relationship with anyone. At this time one night he approached him and told him, "What are you looking for? Are you looking for wine?" This young man said, "Yes, I have been looking for it since the beginning of the night." Joan said to him, "Come with me. I have a lot of it." He walked absent-mindedly with him as he did not think of anything except for getting some wine. Joan took him in the woods near the lake and tied him to a tree strongly. Onda started screaming and tied his mouth so as not to make a noise, and went and brought him food and gave him. He ate, and this vagabond said, "For a long time, I have not eaten this much food. Where is the wine?" Joan said to him, "You will not drink alcohol after this day." He tied his mouth and left him in the woods. On the next day, Joan brought food for this young man, and he ate greedily and began to beg Joan to bring him wine. And Joan answered him, "You do not comprehend what I tell you the first time. You will not drink wine for the rest of your life." The young man shouted and said, "What do you want from me? You want to kill me? Kill me. There is nothing to lose. I have no family, no money, no friends, and no one who cares about me." Then Joan laughed and told him, "That was what I wanted. I want someone like you who does not lose anyone and does not miss anyone." This young man remained tied for 3 days, and Joan came to him with water and food, and on the 3rd day, Joan came with new clothes, body cleaning materials and razors, The young man looked at Joan and said, "Yes, you will kill me. I knew that this day would come. Please let me go." Joan began to laugh and led the young man to the lake and started cleaning him with soap until he and Joan started laughing as he was repeating, "I was not used to that." And Joan was laughing at this involuntary actions, and all that happened while this young man was still tied up and put on his new clothes and started crying and repeating all this to me. He turned to Joan and said, "I still do not understand why you are doing this to me. You are really Maisie." When Joan met this young man, he was wearing a light mask. He was afraid that this young man would recognize him. And he was afraid that if his order failed, he would divulge a secret to the others in the city and be recognized. So he decided to cover his face. When this young man finished showering, Joan put a cover on his face and took him into the woods. He said to Joan, "Why is this cover?" Joan hit on this young man's back and said to him, "What is your name?" "Andrew," he said. Joan replied to him, "Trust me, Andrew, believe me. No harm will happen to you. I just want you to trust me." Reassurance appeared on this young man after this situation, as Joan borrowed him food for 3 days, and he bathed him in water and brought new clothes for him. And he walked with him with his covered face and did not know where they were going together. Joan took him through a long way to his underground house so that he could not guess where he was while he was hooded. And he entered with him into the small tube and after it to the big tube, Joan's house, while he repeated where we were going. And when they entered the room, Joan removed the cover from Andrew's head and then Andrew began turning right and left. And he was repeating, "Where we are. What do you want from me?" Joan replied to him, "You ask a lot, and I told you before that you had to trust me." Andrew rested because of the calmness of the place, but he was still tied. On the contrary, Joan increased his constraints, so he tied him at the end of the room so that he could not move and continued to give him food. And on the second night, Andrew had a look at Joan while he was surfing the internet and asked him what you were doing all that time. "Are you trying to repair this device?" Joan said to him, "I am looking for a hospital for you." Andrew answered, "I am not ill." Joan said, "You are an addict and you need treatment." So Joan said, "You want to treat me from addiction? Do you speak honestly?" Joan said, "Yes, I want to treat you." And Andrew said, "Why and what will you benefit when I am a person who is not addicted? And what will I benefit as well? I have neither goal nor a family. Why should I recover from alcoholism?" All this happened while Joan was covering his head. Andrew has not seen Joan's face yet. Joan took Andrew's cover, covered his face, went to the cash bag, took out $10,000, closed the bag, and went to Andrew. Untied his face cover, untied his handcuffs, and said to him, "You will recover from the addiction for this money." Andrew's eye almost left its place while he was turning the money and Joan repeated to him, "Is it real money or what?" And Andrew says, "It's real. It's real. It's real. Would you give me this money if I recovered completely from my addiction?" Joan said, "Yes. And you will have a house as a gift from you. Have I not told you before that you should trust me?" Andrew did not believe what he had heard and said without hesitation, "I will not drink alcohol. I promise you that I will never drink alcohol at all." And Joan replied, "It is not sufficient for your promise to me and that you must do what I ask for you to do." He said, "What do you want from me?" Joan said, "You have passed the first test. Which is your 3 days stay in the woods and 3 days here with me without drinking alcohol. We will make sure after entering the hospital for treatment of addiction for a period of 3 months. And I will follow in my own way how things are going in the hospital, and if you complete the treatment period successfully, you will be discharged. You will have a house registered in your name and a monthly salary that saves you from the most powerful jobs, and you will have a family and a new life. I just want you to agree to go to the hospital." Andrew did not hesitate or ask about anything after all these offers, but agreed immediately and said, "I promise that I will do my best and I will start from now if you want to do so." Joan said, "I have already arranged for your entry time, which will be 2 days from now." Joan had already corresponded with the hospital about arranging for Andrew's admission to the hospital and that the dues payments of the hospital would be paid weekly and that the treatment would be fully paid at the end of the period. and he told them not to tell Andrew about the person who paid the money because he was Andrew's brother. And Andrew's dignity would prevent him from accepting this money for treatment from Joan. The hospital agreed and thanked him for this kind gesture from him. All of this was done via a forged email to Joan. At night, Joan took Andrew's card and said to him, "I will go and come after several hours. Do not move, I will come, do not be afraid." And he said to him, "Do you remember what I told you and what I always say to you? Trust me." So Andrew said to him, "I really started trusting you," and then Joan laughed and left the place. In the absence of Joan, Andrew started thinking and started to repeat to himself, "Will I really have a house registered in my name, and will I lead a normal life far from streets? Will this happen because I will not drink alcohol? What will this person really want from me? And up till now, I do not know his name and I did not see his face." Finally, Andrew said to himself, "All this does not matter. The important thing is that I saw the money already and this person did not harm me, and he will hospitalize me, and all these matters are good. Why fear?" Joan went to Meckel and explained to her his story with that young man and that he wanted to submit him for treatment in the hospital. So Meckel was surprised with Joan and asked him about the reason. And he said, "I pity him and I have a lot of money, so why not help him with the treatment? Please help me." So she agreed. So he said to her, "I wrote to the hospital and told them that I am far from the city. My aunt will bring you cash every week," and he gave her Andrew's card and asked her to complete the procedures. So she agreed in spite of her fear of the idea and said to him, "Do you trust this person and that he will not cause us trouble?" He said to her with confidence, "He is a poor addict who does not want problems and does not know what is going on around him." So she agreed and went on the same day to fill in the data and confirmation of entry date. When Joan made sure of Meckel that everything was all right on the next day, he returned to Andrew and gave him the card, covered his face, and took him in the woods by another road so that Andrew would not know or guess the road leading to John's place. So the distance he had traveled was equal to twice the distance he was supposed to travel to enter the city. He reached the edge of the city, opened the cover from Andrew's face and said to him, "This is the city, and this is $100. Go walking to the hospital. Do not go anywhere else, but to the hospital completely. I will watch you. I want you to remember that after 3 months, the prize is worth it, a house for you, and it will be registered in your name, and a job that will cry for joy when you know its value. And a new life which is worth this effort." And Andrew replied to him, "Please, trust me, I will not let you down." Joan said, "Listen carefully. Do not answer any question that is directed to you there about me. Say, all the matter is that I have received a call stating that there is a donor who will pay for all the expenses of my treatment here. And be sure that I will watch you until you get into the hospital and I will make sure of your entry there." Andrew left Joan and began to walk after Joan had he removed the cover from his head, and Joan started watching Andrew until he was sure that he had entered the hospital and had already been received and entered the hospital. So Joan returned to his home in the woods. Andrew began to sign his admission papers to the hospital, and he was searched and the possessions with him were checked. One of the workers asked Andrew whether she would pay the expenses or what. He said to her, "I thought that a benefactor had taken care of all this." Another worker said to her with astonishment, "Do not ask, and the expenses have already been paid." And she said to him, "Do you know that once you sign, you do not have the right to leave this place for a period of 3 months? He said, "Yes, and I am ready for this." After that, Andrew was moved from the reception to his room, and immediately on his departure, the employee said, "Do you not understand what the director said to us this day, and that the donor is his brother? And he confirmed to us that we will not mention this in front of Andrew, because dignity of himself prevents him from accepting the money for his treatment from his brother." So she said, "I have already forgotten this." Andrew was enthusiastic about the treatment, not only because he saw the signs of his new life had begun, but the offer by Joan was really tempting and worth all the trouble. On the other hand, Joan was confident of Andrew's success in treatment, as his choice of him was on a basis of awareness of this person's qualifications. Joan was testing all that week he spent with Andrew in the woods, and these tests were the result of readings Joan was looking for in management books and conclusions he had drawn from stories over the past months on the internet. Joan wanted to confirm 3 things before making sure of the correctness of Andrew's choice, and these tests are divided into 3 tests. 1. Truthfulness and honesty. 2. Strength and loyalty. 3. Full recovery from addiction. Honesty and honesty. While Joan was observing Andrew before his selection was made, he noticed that one of the pub owners pushed him hard and spat on his face. Joan liked to test Andrew for showing his truthfulness by mentioning this shameful situation to him and seeing whether he would tell the truth or make up some stories from his imagination. So he asked him to list him the events of the last night before he met him. So Andrew tried to remember until he said, "Yes, I remember," and started telling him all the situations that night until he actually mentioned that situation in which he was spat on, and he felt insulted. But he was under the influence of strong alcohol and did not respond to the man. Joan made sure that Andrew was truthful and did not tell lies. He could have avoided mentioning this embarrassing situation, and Joan answered him with confidence. "Listen, Andrew, you must trust what I will tell you. You will not be exposed to these situations. Your life will change forever. Just give me your confidence." Andrew said with confidence that I trust you. "Joan, you will not believe my feelings towards you, that you are like a brother. I am deprived of this feeling. Please, even if you lie to me, let me feel this beautiful feeling. The feeling that someone cares about you and has fear on you and tells you that he will go and come back as soon as possible. Please let me live in this world, the world of the family. The family world is beautiful, Joan. How many times I am walking in the streets and see the families gathered in a restaurant eating a meal and their faces of joy filled with tenderness and love." Andrew was saying it while he was crying, and Joan listened with joy that he really was able to discover that Andrew is sincere and honest in his feelings towards him. Strength and loyalty. Joan liked to test Andrew in loyalty, so taking care of him and taking him out of the world of poverty and the need for people is not enough. As he is still addicted to alcohol and his soul yearns for it, Joan intended to put a thick stick next to Andrew, and the hours passed and it was by his side until he was sure that Joan had seen it well. And if he had in mind that he would use it, he would make use of any opportunity to kill or hit Joan with it. And after some hours, Joan asked Andrew, "Do you want me to release your hands and sit and read together on the internet?" Andrew answered, "Yes, how I would like that." Joan was careful and ready for any unexpected reaction from Andrew. Andrew was strong, but Joan was stronger than him, and the effect of alcohol was still on Andrew and his strength was still not comparable to the strength of Joan. Andrew's handcuff was loosened and he rubbed his hands, and Joan was wary of him, and both of them read and laughed for a while until Joan said to him, "It is bedtime, you must go to the handcuffs." So Andrew said to him, "Let me on this condition without handcuffs. Do not be afraid," and Joan answered him, "Do not be afraid. It is not time for it. You will not be like this forever." Joan made sure that Andrew had peerless loyalty to him, so he did not even think of treachery to him, despite the fact that the stick was by his side, and Andrew succeeded in the tests. And only his last test remained, which is a test of complete recovery from alcoholism, and this will be seen after the lapse of the 3 months scheduled for Andrew in the hospital. On the other hand, there were contacts between the gangs about Joan, and they were trying desperately to find out his position, but in vain, so that the police chief started repeating to them, perhaps he was killed by a gang member or escaped from the country altogether, and everyone began to understand this possibility with the search which was still in progress looking for Joan. The hospital was sending weekly reports to Joan about Andrew's condition in the hospital, and they were sending him some videos about the development of his health condition. As for Andrew, he was suffering a lot in the first 2 weeks, as he was facing convulsions, and he was struggling in agony and crying throes in addition to nausea, and he sometimes asked for alcohol. But they used to remind him that he had signed a memo preventing him from this request, and he, at many times, remembered his promise to Joan. And what was awaiting for him if he was discharged from the hospital in good health. So this was a strong motivation for him to try to overcome this painful period. The reports continued to be sent and Joan was happy with the results. Joan was reading a lot in the administration books until he delved into them and became aware of all its tricks and secrets. Indeed, Joan was preparing himself for the desired goal of selling and creating his own world with criminality and drug trafficking. And this world would be acclimatized to his hidden situation till he would find for himself a suitable solution for everyone. Joan used to go to Meckel and spend some hours with her at night and return home without anyone noticing it. By the time Andrew was discharged from the hospital, Joan asked Meckel to search for him for a house for sale and to buy it through the bank in installments. Meckel was astonished, but he insisted and said to her, "Please, do not ask me. I suffer a lot from explaining things a lot. Please, I consider you as my mother, and believe me, this topic will not harm you in anything. Just do what I say." So Meckel agreed and said, "As long as this matter will be in your interest, I will do. I have done what is more dangerous than this. I have hidden you from the police and the gang members. Do not be afraid, my son, I will." A small house was purchased, and Joan actually paid the monthly payments to Meckel, and before Andrew got out of the hospital, Meckel ordered to bring a cleaning company and clean the house well. Bought all electrical appliances, TV, and a computer, filled the refrigerator with the most delicious food, and beautified the bedroom with all that is beautiful. On the night Andrew was discharged from the hospital, he had changed completely, so his skin was light and his hair was beautiful. And almost no one knew him, even whom they had seen him before entering the hospital, as he had already changed completely. Andrew went out at night and was greeted by Mrs. Meckel. Andrew looked at the sky and said, "As if it was the first time I had seen this city. How beautiful is life." She walked with Andrew and he asked her where we were going, so she said, "We are going to meet an important person who wants to see you now as soon as possible." The two headed to the new house that Mrs. Meckel had bought. Upon their arrival, Andrew asked her for whom that beautiful house was, and she said he would know after a little while, and they all entered and found Joan waiting for them inside. Andrew knew him from his tone of voice and he began hugging him and shaking his hands, and Joan laughed and said, "You did it, you did it." And Andrew responds, "Yes, see that my blood is pure, there is no alcohol in it. I completely do not care for it now." Meckel left the house and Joan and Andrew were left alone. Joan said to Andrew, "Go and inspect the house and tell me what you think about it." Andrew opened the rooms, entered the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, looked at the food and opened the windows. And then he quickly returned to Joan and said it was a beautiful house. Then he looked at Joan with a strange look, saying, "Do not tell me that this is the house that you promised me, please, do not say this." Joan laughed and said that you always forget what I tell you. Did I not tell you to trust what I tell you? Just trust me. Joan said it and Andrew repeated it with him as usual. Andrew ran to the bedroom and threw himself on the sleeping bed and started shouting that it is my new life. Yes, I will live a new life and I will move away from the streets and a lost life. Joan was standing in the bedroom laughing and said to him, "Yes, a new life you deserve, Andrew. Come here to continue the rest of speech in the sitting room." The two sat and Andrew was in a state of anticipation and Joan began to speak and said, "Listen to me well, Andrew. I have chosen you from among the many to be able to accomplish a difficult task and I am sure that you will complete it successfully." Joan was still covering his face, and Andrew did not see John's face at that moment and did not even know his name. Andrew stopped and said, "I do not even know your name and I have not seen your face yet." Joan replied to him, "Do not ask much. The right time for all this will come." Andrew replied, "Are you a runaway from the police or from a certain gang?" Joan nervously replied, "I told you not to ask too much. Am I told you that 1,000 times?" John said, "I will not do not get angry. I will not ask you again." Joan calmed down a little and said, "Listen to that. I trust you and will not harm you. On the contrary, I will benefit you and you all I want from you now that you remain a natural person and do not delude people of any radical change in your life. Practice your normal life and do not tell anyone what happened or will happen between us." Andrew promised to do so. Joan said, "From now on, Call me Mr. X, and the communication between us will be by text messages via mobile only, and as I have already said, practice your normal life and never return to wine or you will lose all that you have and you will return to the street life. This house is yours now, but it has not registered in your name and I will do so when you succeed in the task that you do. You will know its details soon. In the meantime, go about your normal life. And John gave Andrew a mobile phone and told him to use this phone and never lose it or leave your eyes. Even if you entered the bathroom, he must be with you and wait for a call or text message from me informing you of the date of our next meeting. And Joan left the house. Joan kept watching Andrew. Where did he go? Who is he meeting? When does he sleep? What does he do at home? He was watching him through the windows and did not leave until after Andrew fell asleep. He was recording all the information, thinking and analyzing all his movements. And the period of observation was about 2 weeks, after which Joan was confirmed that Andrew lived a normal life far from criminality and addiction. Joan used to switch off his mobile phone and only open it very far from his home in the woods to make sure that no one was following him. Although in fact, there was no one who would follow him or follow Andrew as he used a phone that was not officially registered in his name, and Andrew also used a phone that was not registered and considered Andrew's criminal file as a clean one as he had no precedents before entering the hospital, and one night, near Andrew's house, Joan was watching his movements, so he sent him a text message informing him that he might see him after 2 or 3 nights at home. Andrew read the letter with joy and gladly replied that I was waiting for you. Minutes later, Joan knocked on Andrew's door and he opened for him, and Andrew was surprised and said, "Didn't you say it after a night or 2? Joan said, "You did not leave your habit. You ask too much. You must learn not to ask me at all. Please." Joan came in and sat on the sofa and said, "Sit. You will know the difficult task that will be entrusted to you. Listen, Andrew, I have a lot of drugs. We will establish the 3 biggest drug gangs." Andrew started laughing and said, "The 3 biggest drug gangs? Are you drunk? Do you want to make fun of me?" Joan looked at him and said firmly, "Do you expect that everything I did to you and the huge money that I spent on your treatment and your house inspire you that I want to mock you?" Andrew was silent and then said, "I do not expect that." Joan said, "Listen to me well, we must start from now. I'm too late. We must make the selection as soon as possible. I want some things from you to get it done as soon as possible," and Andrew showed his complete readiness to everything. Joan asked Andrew to bring 2 pistols and some ammunition and ordered him to get to know drug addicts and warned about 2 things. The first thing is that they know the place of his home, and the second is that he falls in using drugs. Joan believed that drugs addicts and alcoholics are not trustworthy. The person must be clean to control his mind and emotions. This theory was explained to Andrew, who agreed with the opinion and said to him already, "Yes, I was ready to say anything while I was addicted to alcohol." Joan left Andrew and said to him, "I will pass by you after a while during which you are to have known many drug addicts and deepened in their knowledge," so Andrew agreed and they left each other. Joan continued watching Andrew without his knowledge, and after nearly 2 weeks, he sent him a text message asking, "Is the mission complete?" Andrew immediately replied, "It is completely complete." Then Joan knocked on the door on Andrew and he opened to him and said, "Do you always send your messages while you are in front of the door?" and said to him, "Do not ask too much." He gave him the pistol and ammunition, so Joan put them in his pocket and said, "Can you believe that I have not carried a gun belonging to me since I was young?" And he started laughing and repeating, "I expect that it will not leave my pocket for the rest of my life?" And asked Andrew whether he got to know drug addicts well. And he said, "Yes, and I began to sit with them and even I invited most of them to have quick meals, and I knew where to buy drugs, how much the drug is priced, what types are available and a lot of information." Joan said, "In the next stage, I want you to know who sells drugs to them who have these qualities, strength and courage and are not addicted to drugs. I want you to know 5 names, and specify their place of residence, and places they go, but be careful, I do not want gang leaders. I want who work for drug leaders, who only sell and own the above-mentioned qualities." Andrew agreed and promised to accomplish the task as soon as possible. Joan gave Andrew $5,000, and Andrew said, "What is this?" He said, "This is the price of your doing of the task perfectly, and the price of fulfilling your promise to me that you conceal the secrets that we have, and the price of not returning to the world of addiction. And work is still existed between us. You will gain a lot if you work with me like this." Andrew took the money and said, "You will see that I am with you, and will not betray you, and I will do my best to work for you. Do not fear Mr. X." And Joan left the house in disguise.